All right, hello everyone. Welcome to today's event. I'm Jason Gumpert from MSDynamicsWorld.com. I am pleased to be able to host another one of our Portals community calls featuring Nick Hayduk of Engineered Code. It's great to have him back once again. We've been doing these for quite a while now, and they're always a lot of fun. And
A whole year now. A whole year now.
Yeah, all right. Is this our 1-year anniversary of these? I actually
It is, yes.
Awesome. Yeah, well, as always, I think we have a pretty well-worn format at this point. We do welcome your questions. You can enter them anytime in the questions block in the webcast interface. Nick will, as always, be making time for those. And we are also recording today's event. So yeah, without any further delay, Nick, I'm going to hand things off to you.
Awesome. All right. Well, Happy New Year, everyone. Welcome to 2021. Yeah, I hope everyone's keeping safe out there, and all waiting to, get our vaccines and move on with our lives, right? So just a quick introduction here. If you don't know who I am, I'm Nicholas Hayduk, the President and Software Engineer with Engineered Code Consulting, Inc., Microsoft MVP, and I've been doing this Portals things for quite a while now. I started my career at ADX Studio. If you're not already kind of linked with me on LinkedIn, or connected, I guess, with me on LinkedIn, you can find that there. You can also follow me on Twitter. You can check out my blog, which I'm happy to say I went too many months without actually putting out a new blog post, and I put out a couple already this year, so hoping to get back into that groove, as well as YouTube videos where our goal is to do one every single week this year, so that's what we're working on, and we're on pace to do that. So far, we've done it every week, and we're starting to get some in the queue, as well as the Refresh the Cache podcast. If you like podcasts and you like portals, then that is the podcast for you. We've kind of cornered that market, so you can check out the podcast that I host with Nick Dolman and Colin Vermander. So yeah, that's me. Again, I always like to give a shout out to Jason and his team at MS Dynamics World. They've been overwhelmingly supportive with this initiative, helping me get the word out, and keeping things going. So it's really great to be working with Jason and his team over at MS Dynamics World. Really, really appreciate it. All right, our agenda here, we're going to follow our kind of typical format. Since we haven't, we kind of took a break in kind of at the end of December there. We kind of mushed our November and December call into a single one. We've got almost kind of 2 months of a backlog. Obviously, over the holidays, probably not a lot happened, but we got quite a bit of news to get through. Then we will move on to today's topic, which is invitation codes, which I'm really excited to talk about because, as has mentioned to Jason before we jumped on the call here, I don't know how many, even over the last couple of weeks, how many times I've been working with clients and we're getting into invitation codes, and I said, actually, you know what, if you want to jump on my Portals community call, there's going to be lots of information there as well. So it's a topic that comes up on pretty much every single Portals implementation you'll do. So it should be pretty applicable to everyone in the community. So, and then of course we will have time for questions. Again, to be clear, the questions do not have to be in any way related to invitation codes. Whatever questions you got, feel free to drop them in the Q&A section there at the end. If you do have any questions throughout the presentation specific to what I'm talking about, please do drop those in the questions. We've got Paul with us who can help field some of those questions. Let me know if I've missed something. Otherwise, if you want to keep your general Portals questions to the end, we can deal with them at that point. All right, so let's jump into the Portals news. I'm going to start off with kind of some official stuff from Microsoft. The first one, which to be honest, caught a few of us in the community as a surprise, we weren't really given much we weren't given any advance notice, was the upgrade of the jQuery version to version 3. So in the kind of latest version of Power Apps Portals, Microsoft made the decision to upgrade the version of jQuery from 1.3, 1.6 something, a 1. Version, and they decided to upgrade that to version 3. You know that it's not for the most part things should have remained the same. There are a few things I think with the attribute function, there are some differences in how things are handled. And I know that there's some guides out there to kind of guide you through the process of going from a 1. Version of jQuery to a 3. Version of jQuery. So just something to be aware of if you are running into your portal having JavaScript errors that weren't there magically before. then there's a good chance it's related to jQuery being updated in your Power Apps portal by Microsoft. So just something to be aware of. Another thing that got released since our last call here was the ability to configure Azure AD B2C. Now, Microsoft has made a number of improvements over the last, say, year with regards to setting up authentication in your portal. You can now set it up through the make.powerapps.com. There's a nice interface, a wizard that kind of replaces the need to be getting into site settings. And the first one that they came out with had support for certain areas. It did have kind of a wizard for Azure AD B2C. But before this most recent release, what you always had to do is you still had to go into the Azure portal, create your Azure AD B2C tenant. You had to do a bunch of configuration on the Azure AD B2C side, and then take that configuration, take those settings, copy it back into your portal. With this latest release, which I think is in preview, I don't know if it's generally available, but it is in preview. I've used it a few times now. You can do it all completely from make.powerapps.com. So that interface that they have in make.powerapps.com will actually create your Azure AD B2C tenant. It will create the app registration that you need. It will set up your user policies for you. So it'll do all that stuff which you have to do manually and kind of copy the settings back in. So you can actually set up an Azure AD B2C tenant and get it all set up with your portal in a matter of minutes. It's really quite fantastic. So it really reduces the learning curve, because Azure AD B2C conceptually is a little bit trickier. It involves setting up a second, another tenant in Azure AD. So it is quite nice to do that via that thing. I see I got a comment here from Nikita. If you have JavaScript issues, you should be able to see them now, and the JS version update is not done in all geos. Yeah, says it's not done, but I'm assuming he meant is done, maybe. Yeah, I think he means that. Nikita, do you mean that it is now done in all geos or not done? If you can clarify. But and then the last one here, and I'm glad that Nikita kind of put a point in here. Nikita Polikov from the Fast Track team at Microsoft, one of the world's greatest resources on portals. There are these capacity consumption reports, which there's that link there, and when I post the recording, I'll post those links there. I've had kind of hit or miss luck trying to actually get those capacity consumption reports, and so I'm thankful that Nikita's saying here that if you don't see them, you can file a ticket with Microsoft to get them, because I know that I've seen a couple instances where we did have them, but a number of places I've gone into trying to get the reports and they weren't there. So, and yes, he is confirming that it is all done. So if your Power Apps portal continues to work and you're not seeing any JavaScript errors, that means the upgrade to version 3 went okay, because he said it's all done in all the geos. So those are kind of the three big pieces of news from Microsoft. Again, the jQuery upgrade to version 3, the ability to configure Azure AD B2C without ever actually going into the Azure portal. That's fantastic, assuming, of course, you have the necessary rights. And then the capacity consumption reports. So those are, how many people are logging in, how many page views you have over the last 30 days, the ability to get that in an Excel spreadsheet without having to contact Microsoft support. Yeah, so, and Nikita's just making another point, is that you can't see the capacity reports if you don't have the capacity licensing yet, which he says is kind of chicken and egg, because people want to know how many they have before they decide to switch. Again, you can reach out to Microsoft support to get some of those details for you. So thank you very much, Mr. Polikov. All right, next page here, a couple of community things from our friend, Mr. Nick Dolman. He's put out a blog post on using the Power Apps portal's web API to clear the portal's cache. I'm not necessarily, and I don't think he's necessarily recommending that in a production deployment. I think the big reason I'm highlighting it is that I get asked about it all the time. So it's more about, okay, look, technically you can do this, but this is why it's not as easy or as great as you might think. It is kind of a workaround hacky thing. So maybe if you're desperate, you might use it, but waiting 15 minutes for the cache to refresh may not be the end of the world so much. I think that is preferable in most cases over trying to do what he's kind of demonstrated that you can do. Again, we get asked about it all the time. That's why we named the podcast about refresh the cache. But he's put up a nice long blog post about how a technique for using the portal's web API, which will technically clear the cache. The other thing I wanted to highlight was the XRM Portals Community Edition end of life. Now that's not that the code doesn't work anymore. It's just the KPMG Adoxio, the firm that kind of spun out of ADX Studio, and Alan Mervitz had taken the portal source code and put it up on GitHub. He's essentially archived that project, so there's no more ability to put ask for pull requests, all that sort of stuff. So that project is essentially kind of dormant, and they don't intend on making any new updates for it. The code is still there. I still go to that code almost every single day when I'm trying to figure out how the portals works, because a lot of that code still exists in the Power Apps portal product itself. But obviously with some changes coming that we've already talked about, some changes coming to how Microsoft will be authenticating that product, I think it's April 2022, which when they first announced it seemed a long ways away, but now we're kind of under a year. That product may not be, is probably not viable for very much longer. So just, your weekly or your monthly reminder that if you're still using the XRM Portals Community Edition, you want to start planning for what your options are past that. All right, so that kind of covers what we had in terms of news. So why don't we jump into, I don't see any other questions about the news. So why don't we jump into today's topic, which is invitation codes. All right, so what are invitation codes? Now, and again, I was saying earlier that I'm excited to talk about this because this is something that comes up on almost every single project. There are very few projects out there that don't have either existing contacts that they want to invite, or they want to, they don't want to leverage open registration, so they come up with some sort of invitation code model to get people into the system. So what are invitation codes? So invitation codes allow you to do things with or to existing contacts for a Power Apps portal. So when the contacts already exist in Dataverse, there are certain things that you may want to do to those contacts that you can do via invitation codes. Now, invitation codes are, in my experience, 90, 95, 99% of the time used. So the most common scenario is to associate an existing contact with login credentials, often at the very outset of a portal project. So you launch your portal day one, you have 100 customers that were already in your Dynamics instance or your Dataverse instance, and you want, when they log in, for their contact record to be associated with their login credentials. So the way you do that is to use invitation codes. So essentially at a high level, what the process is you send out an invitation code, the user gets a unique link, they click on it, and they go through the process of redeeming that invitation code. Again, the most common reason that we use invitation codes are for you're launching a portal, you have existing contacts in there, so that when you want to invite existing contacts to your portal, so that when they log in, they're linked to that, they're linked to their account, they're linked to their cases, whatever other data is in the portal that you want them to be able to see. You use invitation codes to link up those existing contacts with the credentials that someone sets up when they log in for the first time. Now, I said that there's other things you can do. So other things you can do with invitation codes is when someone redeems an invitation code, you can also assign them a web role. When someone redeems an invitation code, you can also have it execute a classic workflow. You can also have it assign that contact to an account. So these are all different things you can do with invitation codes. So when someone actually redeems that invitation code, you can have it do those things. So those are all the different things you can do with invitation codes. Now, there are essentially two types of invitation codes. So there's a type of invitation code called the single invitation code. Now, this is, as you might suspect, this is when that invitation code is set to, or is sent to a single contact. And so this can be a little bit confusing because people think, okay, I've created my portal, I've got 100 contacts that I want to invite to my portal. Why don't I just send them a group invitation code so that they can all register and get associated with? The idea with a group invitation code is that the exact same invitation code is sent to the contacts. So the fact that that invitation code is not unique to the contacts means it's useless for trying to say this person is linked to this contact, because everyone gets the same invitation code. So there's no way to know which of the 100 contacts that you sent the group invitation to is which contact. So the reason for the group invitations would be something like, I want to give out this web role to the first 100 people who accept this invitation. So what you can do is you use it for people who already can log into the portal, and you use it to send out that group invitation to use some of those other capabilities I talked about, which are like assigning a web role or execute a workflow. Those are the reasons you can use a group invitation. I'm trying to think back if I've ever actually done that in a project. I think the answer is no. Pretty much all the time we're doing the single invitation code that is sent out to a single contact with the purpose of allowing them to associate authentication information with their contact record. So again, you see single, you see group as the type. A lot of people kind of get confused and say, oh, I want a group one because I'm sending it out to a bunch of people, but that's different because all those people will get the exact same invitation code, which does not help you associate them to a contact record. So again, I kind of talked about this at a high level. How does the invitation code process work? So essentially what happens is you have an existing contact in the system. You are then able to create an invitation code. Now there's a record type, there's a table in Dataverse called invitation code. So when you click the button to create an invitation code, or whether you do that with a workflow, it will actually create a record in Dataverse or a row in the Dataverse database in the invitation code table. And then once you save that record, there are, I think there are plugins that run that actually generate the unique invitation code. So the actual code that you'll see in the email is created kind of when you save that record for the first time. Once that invitation code is created, you're then able to set the necessary parameters. So you can say, okay, when someone redeems this invitation code, I want to execute this workflow, I want to assign the web roles, all that sort of process. So you create the invitation, you save it, it generates the code, you can then set it up the way you want. And then what you do is you run the send invitation workflow, which is a classic on-demand workflow. And that send invitation workflow actually sends out the email to the contacts. So in that email, there will be a link to the portal that includes the invitation code. The user gets that email, they click on the link, they come to the portal, and they're able to then sign in and redeem that invitation code, and they get whatever fanciness that you've included. So whether it's the web roles, or in the case of if it's a brand new user to your portal, once they sign in, it will say, oh, I redeemed this particular invitation code that was attached to this contact. So whoever just logged in must be that contact, and it kind of associates that contact with the credentials that have just been entered. Now, this is the key step in setting up the invitation code, is that you need to customize the send invitation workflow in the Dynamics 365 portals-based workflow solution. Now that's the name of the solution, whether you're dealing with Power Apps portals, Dynamics 365 portals, same thing, same solutions. If you look in there, and again, we'll look at all this in real life here in just a second, but you do need to customize the send invitation workflow. At the very, very least, you need to update the URL of the portal that exists in that workflow. That workflow will have like a local host with some weird port number in there. You need to make sure that's updated so that when users get the email, they're actually clicking a link that will take them to your portal. You also typically want to do things like update the language in there. The language is not it's not offensive, but it's not really like super fancy. So often you want to put in some, whether it's some branding or some language about your company. Hey, welcome to our portal, all that sort of stuff. That can all be done in that send invitation workflow. The other thing you want to do is you want to make sure that the from address that is used in that workflow, by default it's blank, so it'll kind of run as whoever kind of runs the record, but lots of times you'll be just kind of picking a particular user or queue to send these emails from. You want to ensure that that person is enabled for sending emails. Again, the invitation code system uses classic workflows. It uses the email capabilities built into Dataverse. So typically nowadays that would be the server-side sync. So you want to make sure that whoever is actually on the from for that email is set up to properly send emails. Otherwise, the email record will get created, but it will never get sent, and that's not very useful either. So typically, you just want to make sure that you're setting that to some, a queue with email server-side syncs turned on, or a user, or if you've got server-side syncs set up for all your users, then you can rely on, you can set it to be the owner of the contact, or a number of different options. But you do want to make sure that that is configured. That's something we get kind of asked about all the time. They say, hey, the email's there, but it's not getting sent out, and that's because people just haven't set up the email capabilities in their Dataverse environment. So I talked about kind of the mass inviting of contacts. So again, often during the launch of a portal, invitation codes are used to invite contacts that already exist in Dataverse. So if you already have, say, a Dynamics 365 sales implementation, you're doing a partner portal and you want to invite all of your existing partners, you probably already have contacts for them. So what you want to do is you want to invite them to your portal. Now, again, you want to stay away from group invitations. What you want to do, you can either manually click the create invitation button and go through all 100 or however many you have, go through that process and do it manually. Or what we typically do is you build a classic workflow. In theory, you could do this with Power Automate flows as well. There's nothing stopping you from kind of leveraging that, calling actions. We've seen that done before. But I mean, since everything else is kind of done in classic workflows, we generally kind of stick with classic workflows for these types of things. And what you can do, so you basically create a workflow that creates the invitation and then invokes that send invitation code, the on-demand workflow to actually send it out. Once you have that workflow that's set to run on demand on a contact, you can then use the bulk workflow execution tool that exists in the XRM toolbox to run that workflow on all the contacts that you want. So if you have 1,000 contacts, you can go page by page, 250 at a time, and run the workflow manually, or you can use the bulk workflow execution tool to do that. Again, stay away from group invitations in this case, because they are not going to be that helpful when you want to send out the mass invite when a portal is first launched. So I got a question here. Does Microsoft have plans to migrate portal workflows to Power Automate? So do they have plans? I'm sure they have plans. Would I be planning? I would say I've got nothing I can share with you in terms of like when that might be happening. It's not something that I'm thinking about on a daily basis. I continue to think that these are going to be built in classic workflows for a while, because I haven't seen any investment in that area. That's never been their focus. We've brought this up a few times with them, and while they acknowledge that I think I can share that they would like that, if they could wave a magic wand and make it use Power Automate, that would be great. I just haven't seen that as the focus. I haven't seen it in any release notes. So while do I think they want to get there? Yes. I don't see any imminent plans to make that happen. Oh, and I just see that Nikita here put a thing. If you're also know that if you're using ADX Studio Portals v7, your configuration experiences are impacted since the switch to unified interface also will stop working, same as Community Edition or Source Code v8 Edition. Yeah, I mean, if what we've had to do for our customers who are still using version 7 is build them a kind of a portal management app kind of from scratch using the thing. Yeah, it said, since they are all just records and data, nothing's stopping you from building something better or more suitable for your needs in Cloudflow. And that's exactly right. So now there are some places, if I were to ask Microsoft to make some investments in Power Automate, I would much rather see them invest on doing things like where you can run a workflow from an entity list or an entity form. If they could make that work with Power Automate, I'd much rather see that than replacing some of these other flows. Because I mean, these other flows work. It would be really cool to have it so that you could run Power Automate flows, cloud flows, directly from an entity list or an entity form. So if I was in charge, that's where I'd be focusing my Power Automate effort, replacing some of these other classic workflows. You can do it yourself, as Nikita mentioned. There's nothing stopping you from doing that, especially if you can start, because now it's relatively simple to call, because if there's some logic within those within those workflows that you need, you can always create a custom action, and it's relatively simple now in Power Automate to call those actions. So you can kind of mix them up a little bit. Yeah, to answer that question, I don't see it coming. I don't see it coming in the next few months. I don't see it coming. There was no notice in the release notes for the last, the release wave that we're in right now. We'll see soon what's in the next release notes, but I just don't see that it as being super high on their priority list. I see a question here. Is there any is there any talk about discounted pricing for 100 or 10,000 plus portal logins? And I see Ulrike is asking about the sound. Is my sound still okay? Can someone maybe just drop in the chat or something if my sound is still okay?
You sound okay to me,
okay.
Nick.
Okay. I know Ulrike's on the other side of the world, so maybe I don't know, maybe she's having some connection issues, but so I got a question here about discounted pricing. I will deal with that as a licensing question, kind of unrelated to invitation codes. I'll deal with that here in a second, or at the end in the Q&A session. So Jeremy, I will get to that. Okay, what I want to do is just kind of go and actually kind of show some real live, kind of go through that process that I just walked through in the slides here in a kind of a real environment. So let me just bring this over here. So I do have this Power Apps portal. This is a partner portal. So the first thing I want to kind of point out is, so if I go into a contact, if I say create a new contact, and let's say I do Jason Comfort, and I'm just going to put your personal email here so everyone knows how to reach you.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I click save on that. So now I've got this contact record. Assume that he's been a partner. He has been a partner. I don't even have to pretend he's been a partner of ours for a long time. So let's just say I launched a portal and I wanted to give him access. As soon as I save this contact record, what I'm going to see is that there are a couple of fancy portals related buttons. The one that we care about here is create invitation. Now this create invitation, really all it's doing is it's creating a new invitation record. It's not even saved yet, so it's just kind of jumping me over to this form where I can then fill out the details. So again, we've got our type of single versus group. In most cases, when we talk about just kind of inviting someone to a portal, there's not really much else you have to do. It's automatically creating a name for us. The invited contact is already associated. So I can just click save here. And if I go over to the advanced tab, we'll now see the invitation code. I maybe should have shown that before I saved it, but before I saved it, this would have been blank, but now we see this is the actual invitation code that we want. Now, if for whatever reason email is not, like you're not wanting to automate that email, there's no reason that you can't just like copy and paste and send this to the users in some other way. That's totally possible, and people can copy and paste the redemption email or code into the portal, but typically we see people sending it out via email. So I mentioned that there are some other capabilities that come into play when we talk about invitation code. So we can make this contact be assigned to an account when it redeems. We can have it execute a workflow. So here are all the workflows that it can execute on the contact. And we can also assign it to web roles. The other thing we can do, the only kind of difference between single and group here is that if I switch to single, instead of there being a single invitee, I can put a bunch in here, but I'll just kind of leave this as single for now. So we've got these options. If I say add existing web role here, I'm just going to say, hey, when he logs in, I want him to be a partner admin. So when he redeems that invitation code, it's also going to associate this partner admin web role to his account or to his contact record. And that's pretty much all there is to setting up the invitation itself. And then, as I mentioned, kind of the next step is to actually execute the workflow. So you'll see that there is this send invitation workflow. So why don't we just take a quick peek as to what that looks like? I've already got it open over here. This is the classic workflow. It's set as an on-demand process that runs on the invitation code record. the first thing we do is there's a custom workflow activity that encodes the invitation, and that's just to, if there's any special characters in there, we don't want those to get lost. So basically it just encodes it. We then create the email. So essentially what we're doing is we're creating an email template that's being used to send the email. This is the email that you want to customize. So as I mentioned, there's a little bit of work here, typically coming up with some language here, and you can see what we have in here is the actual URL. So it's very unlikely that your portal's URL is localhost :7500 for a port number. So typically what you want to do is you just want to replace this part with your Power Apps portal URL, and then the /register, that's correct. So you want it to go to whatever your Power Apps portal URL is, /register, and then query string. You can do the return URL if you want, and then the invitation equals the invitation code that was encoded in that first step. Just got some questions here. So in configuring the Azure B2C, you can specify that the system linked the newly registered contact to a user existing via matching email address. What else would the invitation flow add? So yeah, that's a great question. So if one of the ways that you can avoid the invitation code process if you want is you can enable essentially kind of like open registration, but it will match based on the user or the email address coming from the identity provider. So if you've configured Azure AD B2C properly to pass email addresses from the identity provider to your portal, you can have the portal essentially use the email address as their invitation code. And that can work as long as people know the correct email address that they're using. So in that case, if you're confident that yes, all these people have their email address and you want to invite them that way, you can do that. Generally, you're still sending out some sort of email to say, hey, welcome to our portal, especially if you've just launched it. So, you know, it's a little bit more open because then anyone with an email address, with that correct email address, can just kind of claim their user. So I kind of lean towards using the invitation codes versus the just matching on email address, because it's possible to kind of, depending on which types of accounts you have enabled in Azure AD B2C, if you don't have email verification turned on, there's ways that it's not quite the same as doing an invitation code. So I always kind of lean towards invitation code. Now, so I hopefully, Mary, that answers your question. Another question here. Sorry if I missed it. Have you talked about the invitation codes with B2C? Like the old experience is that the portal asks you for a code, but if you have it, it takes you to the local username, password authentication, not B2C. Okay, so maybe one thing I should have mentioned is that it's important in your mind that you separate invitation codes from the method that you use to authenticate to your portal. The invitation codes are a separate process, and they work with whatever invitation or whatever authentication or whatever identity providers you have on your portal. So for example, if you set up Azure AD B2C on your portal and you select it as the only authentication mechanism, you set it as the default provider, so that means the only way people can get in with Azure AD B2C, the flow will be the same, except for when someone goes in to redeem their invitation code, rather than be asked to create a local account, they're going to be redirected over to Azure AD B2C, where they have to then either use one of the identity providers or create a local account. So this same process, the invitation code process, is independent of the way that you log into the portal. So the invitation code process is not related just to local auth or anything like that. It is completely independent of how you log in. The point of the invitation code process is to link a contact with however that contact chooses to log in after they've gone through the process of redeeming that code, whether that's Azure AD B2C or another identity provider directly with the portal or local auth. All of those things work with with invitation codes. So hopefully that answers that question. I got another question here. Which invitation process is better, having in mind management and automation? CRM, local credentials on portals with send invitation, or third party? So I would strongly recommend not using the CRM local credentials. Those were actually deprecated at one point. They're not deprecated as of right now. And that's purely because really what we'd prefer to to see people using is Azure AD B2C or another identity provider hooked up to your portal. So if you're using a third-party thing like Okta, go ahead and use that with your portal. But using the local identity provider in portals, it will be deprecated again. What really is we're waiting for is that Azure AD B2C is not available in every single data center. So I'm in Canada here. If I go create an Azure AD B2C tenant, even though all my other stuff might be in Canada, my Azure AD B2C tenant will be in the US. And then obviously for some organizations, that's a problem. So until Azure AD B2C is available in every single geographic Azure data center, it won't. They'll still support local auth, but longer term local auth will be gone. It was deprecated at one point, they kind of retracted that, but longer term it will be gone. So strongly recommend that you use Azure AD B2C. And if you're going to use things like Google or Facebook or any of those other ones, you can put that into your Azure AD B2C. Azure AD B2C has local auth within it itself. It has Google, it has all those other providers. You can put OpenID Connect in there if you want as well, so you can put in custom identity providers. The nice thing about Azure AD B2C is that there's a team at Microsoft that is solely focused on supporting and building out these external identity provider support. And that team is Azure AD B2C. That is not the portals team. So you're going to see innovation much more quickly with Azure AD B2C. Okay, we got a question here from Mike. Forgot your password feature. Is there a way to handle multiple contacts with the same email address? The portal requests an email to send the reminder to, but what if multiple contacts have the same email address? Yeah, so the email address thing, I'm assuming you're referring to kind of the local auth. If you're using email address as the username, then obviously it'd be unique. If you're not using it, then that is a challenge. So I don't have a great answer, unfortunately, Mike, on that one. If there are two contacts with the same email address, I'm not sure how that forgot password would work. It might just not work. I'm not sure if there's a workaround for that, so sorry. And then Jeremy's got a question, has anyone used Firebase for auth? I personally haven't used it. I've heard of other people using it, but I haven't personally used Firebase for auth. I've heard of other people doing it though. If anyone else has some experience, you can drop that in the questions too, and maybe you can touch base with Jeremy. But I personally have not used Firebase auth for portals yet. Okay, so back to the invitation code here. So again, customizing this email, you'll see that this email doesn't have a subject, putting in the proper from user, all the things that we want to do as part of the customization of this email, customizing the text of the email, getting the right link in there, so that when they click on this link, it will direct them to the portal with the invitation code kind of pre-filled. How are we doing for time here? We're doing okay. So now if I go back to the activities and notes related to this thing here, I'm trying to remember if I actually ran the workflow. I might not have ran it yet. Let me just see. No. Okay, so let me do that. So flow, send invitation, confirm that. Now I haven't set up all the emails, so no one's actually, Jason, your personal email won't get spammed in this case. But what I should expect to see here is I should be able to see that email get generated. So here's the email activity. You'll see it'll probably get stuck in pending send, but here's the email. Now, if I click on this link, obviously that URL isn't correct. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the URL of my portal, just kind of put that in here, and we'll see what happens. Oh, one too many slashes. So you can see now we've come to our portal. It's pre-filled the invitation code. If I go back to my invitation code, that's the invitation I had. It's on the query string, so it pre-fills it in. And now I go through the registration process. So that's what I was kind of talking about earlier. So when I click register, and we'll talk about this, have an existing account here in a second. So if I click register, this is taking me to this register for a new local account, or I can click over here. And you can see I've got Azure AD B2C configured. Typically, if you have Azure AD B2C configured, you're going to set it as the default identity provider, so you'll never see this screen. When you click this button, you're going to be immediately redirected to Azure AD B2C and just go right there. So you're not going to see that other screen. So typically, you just want to set up that single identity provider. Otherwise, you'd have to, if you have multiple identity providers that you want to support directly on your portal, then you just turn off local if you don't want it. But you can see here it's kind of pre-filled in my email address. And then what I can now do is fill out these things or log in with Azure AD or go through Azure AD B2C where I would create my account. I'd go through that process. And then when I log in, I'm going to be attached to that contact record that's associated with that invitation code. And that's how you go about redeeming that invitation code. If I do this, put in this, and then I click register using this. Again, don't recommend this in production, but it is super easy for demos and testing purposes. You can see now I've logged in, and the key here is I never filled in my first name, I never filled in my last name. This information is coming from the fact that I've now been associated with my contact record. So now if I go back here and I go to Jason Gumpert, and I can see that if I switch this over to the portal contact, I'll see under web authentication that my username and password has been set up. So I've essentially created a username and password that's been associated to that contact. In theory, if I go to web roles, you can see now that we've got the partner admin that that got added to the user as part of this. This must be another workflow that fires that added this one, but the partner admin was added as part of me accepting that invitation code. So there's a question here from Omar about, can we bypass the page before the sign up where the code shows up? It seems like it's just an extra step that has no meaning. You know what, you're right. It does kind of feel that way because it kind of is. The main purpose for this one that I'll touch on now is there's this, I have an existing account. And so the idea with this is that in theory, some people can just, if they have the invitation code, they can just go to this page and they can put it in here and then they can click the register button. The other thing here is just I have an existing account. The purpose of this I have an existing account is for the case of group invitation. So when you click I have an existing account, what it's going to do is rather than taking you to the register page, and so this isn't going to work because I've already redeemed this invitation code, but instead of taking you, when you say I have an existing account, instead of taking you to the registration page, it's going to take you to the sign-in page. And so that's, again, typically used for group accounts where you're already you're not wanting to associate with a new contact, you're just trying to redeem an invitation code for an existing contact. That is very, very rarely used in my experience. So in fact, I have on my next slide here, I've got a tip about, typically we just remove that. If you want to remove this page completely, we have seen some people who, it is possible to just drop some JavaScript on this page that forces the register button to click when they get there. It's not a very elegant experience, but I'm not aware of a way of kind of server side of just hiding this page. So the best I've seen come up with is that you just fire JavaScript that clicks the register button when they get there if the invitation code is filled in. That's the best I can offer at this point. All right. So the last slide I have here are so some other tips. So if you want to make if you want different language in your email, so often we have, okay, the portal's being launched. We've got 100 people we want to invite to our portal on launch day. We send out an email that has some certain text in it. Okay, then 5 days down the road, there's a legitimately new customer, and you want to invite them to the portal, but you don't necessarily want to say, hey, we got our new portal. It's just like, no, we have a portal. Like, it's everyday business for us. We have a portal. So again, because these are built out in classic workflows, or if you want to build them out with Power Automate, you're not limited to just having one invitation code email. You can have a bunch of different workflows for different scenarios. Maybe you want to have different language for managers versus regular employees. Just build up those different workflows, follow the same steps, but just have different language in the emails. Completely possible to do. Another thing is you can build out your own registration on the portal. And I do have a blog series on this about customizing the registration experience, because out of the box, the portal registration experience is relatively rigid. So you can't ask for a bunch of data. One way around that is to actually ask the user to fill out a registration record that you create. Once they've filled out that registration record, then you initiate the invitation code process to allow them to then come back to the portal and associate that contact with the username and password. So if you're interested in a different way of getting having people register on your portal, you can check out the blog series that I have on doing that. And then the last post here is using CSS to hide the I have an existing account checkbox on the redeem invitation code page, because it really, I find it just typically causes confusion. People don't know when to check it or not. Generally, you want to leave it unchecked. So it's relatively easy to add some CSS to hide that. And in fact, I got that CSS. I will share that in probably what will be my next blog post. So keep an eye out for that if you want to hide that. Okay, 2:45, right on time. So that kind of covers what I had in terms of content for invitation codes. I did want to just share that the next community call, of the topic of which I haven't yet determined. So I'm trying to remember who it was. Jeremy, was it you who asked for this topic? Sorry, I forget, but there was someone who specifically asked for invitation codes this month, so people get what they ask for. So if there are any topics you'd like to see covered, please let me know. But yeah, that was specifically requested. So if you've got anything you want to see next month or in a future month, please let me know. Probably the toughest part about these calls is just coming up with topics. So happy to kind of cover topics that the community is interested in. But yeah, next call will be February 18th at 3 p.m. And I think as always, want to thank MS Dynamics World for their support. And I think that means I want to leave it up to Q&A. I know that there was one question already about licensing. So if you do have any other questions that you want answered that are, whether they're invitation code or not, please feel free to stop or feel free to drop those in the questions, and I will go up and answer this question about the licensing. So I believe the question was, is there any talk about discounted pricing for 10,000 plus portal logins? So I'm going to tread carefully here because I'm not a lawyer. I don't speak on behalf of Microsoft. But my understanding is that Microsoft is always willing to have a chat about large portal volumes in terms of logins or page views. So if you do have something that exceeds kind of the published limits, I would definitely be talking to your Microsoft representatives to see if there's anything you can do. Yeah, I've heard that technique has been successful in the past, so I definitely recommend that. I haven't heard anything about that being there being an official price list change or anything like that. But I do know that if you talk with Microsoft and you've got certain volumes, that there's the possibility that you can talk about some bulk discounts. So that's probably as far as I should say on that topic. Got a question here, event management portal registration payments. So the event management portal, that is part of the, I'm assuming you're talking about like the Dynamics marketing portal. That is a portal to which I have not really done anything with. It's based on Power Apps portals, but not really. Like it's a very different thing. The Microsoft team built out a portal template using Power Apps portals, but it is very different and it's not something that I've really worked with. So unfortunately, I don't have much to add to the event management portal, that sort of thing. Now, you can certainly build an event management portal in Power Apps portals, and then you can do payment registrations. We've done that before, where we allow users to register on a Power Apps, kind of a more traditional Power Apps portals. We accept payment. We do a lot of work with the Stripe APIs for payments, so you can kind of embed that or integrate that into your Power Apps portal. So that's all possible. But in terms of the kind of the out-of-the-box event management portal, it's something that I haven't had a chance to play with. And to be honest, I would probably be pretty happy if I never had to. Are there any other questions that people have about anything Power Apps portals with, doesn't even have to be Power Apps portals, but I know that Nick Dolman has some interesting thoughts on other types of portals that you can build, Jamstack type portals that interact with Dataverse, other portal technologies, whether it's the portal connector or Alexa CRM's WordPress connector. Another thing so one of the questions that I get asked, I feel like it's on a daily basis, is, can you send me some good examples of Power Apps portals? I guess I'm kind of curious, out there in the community, is that a question that you find yourself being asked, or is that a question that you feel like you want to ask? One of the things I was thinking about doing is if I could compile kind of a gallery of Power Apps portals projects, would that be useful to the community? Would people like to be able to go to a link basically and see like, oh, here's the links to a bunch of different Power Apps portals projects? Let me know, let me know some way through social media or whatever. Just let me know if you'd find that useful. It's something I'm considering doing because I know I get asked all the time for, what is, can you give me examples of portals? Often the ask is, can you give me examples of portals that don't look like portals? So yeah, there's some examples out there that you look at and be like, oh, I didn't even realize that was built using Power Apps portals. A lot of the Power Apps portals out there, they do kind of, they got some different colors. But a lot of the ones you can look at a Power Apps portal and be like, oh yeah, I know that's Power Apps portals. They got the little home icon, the menus over there, the logos over there. So okay, so I do see that there seems to be some interest in it now. Yeah, and Oliver put up a very good trick, which is in Google you can look by URL. So if you look for .powerappsportals.com or Microsoft CRM portals, you can kind of target based on the domain name. So I've done that quite a few times where you just kind of see what's out there. So that's a very good trick for trying to figure out what other Power Apps portals exist out there. You do end up finding a lot of things that probably were never launched, things that are still in dev, things that are in QA, all that sort of stuff. It seems like there's some interest. What I'm hoping is that to kind of crowdsource the portals that are on there, so anyone could essentially say, hey, I know about this portal, as long as we have permission from the organizations that's running the portal, and to be able to feature those, so that we just kind of get this great list of here's all these successful Power Apps portals out there. I think that would be, I know I would benefit from it, and hopefully if the community would benefit for it, then we can just share that as opposed to me just kind of keeping an internal list. So all right, we've got another question from Omar. Unrelated question. We need a GET request to the new WebAPI feature. Is needed, and the fetching is not always the best solution. It's just not consistent with the other request types. Yeah, so this is with the WebAPI. You think, hey, we have a CRUD API, but we don't really have a CRUD. We have a CUD because we have create, we have update, we have delete, but we don't have read. And I think just kind of in Microsoft's defense, there is a way of doing it. I agree that fetch XML is not always the best and it's not consistent. But in terms of like the feature set, there's other ways of achieving that. You can kind of build your own kind of OData service a little bit if you want to, using fetch XML and creating a web template and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, I mean, I think longer term, the goal is that the get would be there. It's just in terms of priorities, if there's another way of solving that problem, which there is, they've chosen to focus on getting the other stuff working. But I hear that feedback, and I will definitely share that with the Microsoft team when we get the next time we chat about that people would like to get. And I know I'm in that same camp too. It would be nice just to have a consistent way of doing that too. So, all right. Is there anything else? Otherwise, I think we can probably wrap it up here a few minutes early. I'm sure everyone else is just bored and has nothing better to do than sit here and has no way to use an extra 5 minutes in their day, but I'll probably do that anyways. Jason, anything you want to say before we wrap up?
No, just look for more information on next month's event. And I guess we can wrap it up there. I'm going to stop the recording, and thank you all so much for attending. Great job as always, Nick. And hey, have a great day, everybody.
Great. Yeah.